Hello class, this is CSE-4410, sections 1 and 2, chapter 4, spring 2025. Okay, so, we're gonna be developing graphics for our game. Well, one option you can do is look for royalty-free assets that you can use for your game. Another alternative is to, make the texture yourself. That is a bit more challenging because, art can be challenging at times, but the point I'm trying to make here is, once we have a fully functioning video game, we can start to, make it pretty. Because so far, all our discussion was writing scripts and applying them to primitives that we've placed around the scene. Nothing about these looks all that good so far, unless you are really okay with basic primitives like these. My point is this. All we've done so far is something called whiteboxing. So whiteboxing is the process, it's also called grayboxing. It's a process of building out a level after you've designed it on paper. Like, you've drawn a sketch on a sheet of paper of what you want your level to look like. Once you have blocked out your scene, you can start adding scripts to these game objects to have them, work, perform the actions that you want them to do. So, I want a turret that spins around and shoots players if the player is close enough. We have a script for that. Well, technically it's two scripts. In my bonus video, I talked about decoupling your scripts so that we can mix and match behavior as needed. As a summary, I talked about decoupling the enemy AI's behavior for wandering around and turning the player into two separate scripts, one for moving and one for shooting the player. By decoupling those two, we get a turret for free. And we get a turret for free by simply taking the separated, decoupled shooter script and pairing it with a script that spins a game object. So those two behaviors together produces a spinning turret. Well, maybe we want a turret that pans back and forth, but it's a simple matter of writing a different script that pans back and forth, but still reusing the same shooter script. On the other hand, by decoupling the two scripts, now we can write out much more complex behavior for the wandering AI without fear of breaking the ability to shoot. So that is what decoupling is for. We separate different functions into separate scripts, one purpose per script, so that if we work on one, any drastic changes that could potentially, at worst, break the script doesn't break any other script. And once again, we can mix and match to get different behaviors we want. Okay, which is all fine and good, but still, our scene is still made out of primitives. So let's fix that. So, let's talk about art assets. So, the first one we're going to talk about is textures, so 2D images. So art assets are just files of visual information that the game uses. For our purposes, that's going to include 2D images and 3D models. 3D models is just mesh information that produces a 3D model of the scene built from triangles. Those triangles form planes. The planes form surfaces that we can then render on the screen. We also need texture information for that, but that's usually done in the form of a material. A material is information that defines the surface properties of an object. An animation that defines how a object moves. In a particle system, that is a mechanism for creating and controlling multiple objects that are used as particles. So particles of what? particles of smoke, particles of fire, particles of water. Okay, so what we've done so far is called white boxing. It's also called gray boxing. This is the process of building a level after you've designed it on paper. So maybe you have a sketch of what you want your level to be. Once you have that sketch all drawn out, you can take it to Unity and block out the scene using primitives. So in Unity, all the primitives are by default white. It doesn't have to be little boxes either, but the point is by blocking out a scene, you do a sketch of what your game is gonna look like. It's a sketch of what your game world is gonna look like. And this is a principle that is associated with level design. Level design is a huge, it's its own subject. It's entirely its own subject that falls within the greater category of game design. Game design, that is a huge category containing lots of different disciplines, some of which aren't even programming. Programming is only but a small part of game design. You also have artists who would work on a game, voice actors, musicians, storytellers, salespeople. So even if a video game has about as much complexity as any other software project, well, it really does. My point is, it's not just programming, even though this class we are talking about mainly the programming side of making a video game. Anyway, the point, so what we're getting at is, once we have a floor plan drawn on paper, we can quickly whip up a scene that looks like this, though in the past few videos we were just winging it and placing things as we like. It's at the stage that if you want to make any changes, we can do so rather quickly without affecting the style choices that goes into the finer details of your game. So, for example, if there is a tree that you want to have in your scene, and oh no, wait, this is scaled wrong, and we have to do it all over again. The point of white boxing is we can place down objects in the scene and adjust them at that stage before actual level designers go in and replace those objects with the final versions. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our player here, and I would like to swap out the capsule for a different model. Okay, so first let's work on the textures. So textures, we're gonna need to create or find a 2D image that we can then apply to the walls of our scene. So it's something like this. So a texture, that's just a 2D image that we apply like it's wallpaper to our primitives. As for file format, there are all sorts of file formats out there. The key things to note are the compression type and whether it has an alpha channel. So PNG and JPG and GIF. Those are some of the most common file types for images. Oh, by the way, I said it as GIF. It's on the topic of whether it's GIF or GIF. It's GIF. That's unambiguous. I believe there's someone who's trying to push the pronunciation of GIF, but I would go even further and say and now we have 5 pronunciations for GIF, or I should say GIF. If I had to falsely pick GIF versus GIF, I would say GIF, but if I had to, I would say GIF because it's unambiguous. Anyway, side note over. So PNG, JPG, and GIF are some of the most common file formats used on the web. PNG has the advantage of having an alpha channel, so we can use it to have transparent textures. It has what is called lossless compression. Image files are huge, so we use compression to make the file sizes more manageable and smaller. That way you can transmit them on that way you can send them online. That way we can send them online much easier because there's less information to send. JPG also has compression, but is what's called lossy compression. When you compress it, some information is lost, but it's usually at the finer details. There's also no alpha channel, so you can't do any. So you can't have transparent textures using a JPG file. GIF, lossy compression also, but also no alpha channel. It's also used for animations as well. Other file formats include PMP, TGA, TIFF, PICT, and PSD. We're gonna mainly work with PNG here, and that is for one good reason. It's got lossless compression and it has an alpha channel. What do I mean by lossy versus lossless compression? So lossy compression, as I said, lossy compression, fine details in an image with lossy compression is lost when the image is compressed. If you zoom in on a JPG file, you'll get compression artifacts that don't look too dissimilar to whatever's going on in here. This is an extreme example of lossy compression, but zoom in far enough on a JPG file and you'll see these JPG artifacts. Anyway, it's for these reasons that the author recommends PNG and another format called TGA. TGA is used for 3D graphics. It has lossless compression, if it has compression at all, but it also has an alpha channel. PSD is also recommended. That is a file format native to Adobe Photoshop. There's no compression, but it has an alpha channel. The main reason to use this would be the advantage of using Photoshop files directly. So if you have Photoshop, good. We can use PSD files in our project, and we can just straight up use those in our project. The same is true for .blend files. So that's the file type native to Blender. Yeah, Blender, the 3D modeling program. So I might have to make a bonus video of me making a turret in Blender. I did make a few 3D models in the past, but they are a bit involved and they are a bit involved to make. But hopefully a turret is easy enough that we can just make it out of Blender's own primitives. So that's the bonus video I hope to produce later in the week. So what we can do to apply textures to our game is we can look up textures online, preferably royalty-free public domain textures or the like. So royalty-free or public domain or anything with a Creative Commons license, read the fine print please. Something that we can use to spice up our scene. Another thing to note is this. For technical reasons, you want your textures preferably to have dimensions that are powers of 2. So if you have an image that isn't a power of 2, like 282 by 282, you would need to scale it down. You would need to scale it to something that is a power of 2, so 256 by 256. The reason is technical, but the short answer is graphics hardware and our associated libraries work with powers of 2, and such everyone who deals with graphics deals with powers of 2. Powers of 2 for the size of your textures. And although you can use non-power of 2 textures, it's still a good idea to use power of 2 dimensions for your textures. Okay, enough talk, let's get to drawing. So, as I said, we can just download a texture from online, but what if we just went with a style not unlike that of Minecraft? So my idea is we can make our own textures right now. So we can make this as detailed or as pixely as we want. Let's go with the more pixelated route because why not? So I'm gonna make a 16 by 16 texture here in a program called Paint.net. You can follow along with any tool that you want. Right now, I want something that looks like a cinder block. So and the thing is, texturing can get a little difficult, but it doesn't have to be. So I'm making some basic textures here. Maybe I want these edges to be a little darker. That doesn't look too bad, but depending on how I fill it, there we go. And I want something on the cool side, so hold on, there we go. Also another thing, depending on your choice of software, this is Paint.net version 5.1.2. There might be newer versions already. I'm just using this because, well, I have it. If you're working with a image editing program that supports layers, you want to save the layers. So in this case, I am going to save this image as a .pdn file. I'll call it Big Bricks, and this is my working file. That way, if I want to change anything about the image, well, I can just work on the layer, and if I screw up the layer, I can just take out that layer and start over. So right now, I have this layer here that I actually had left from a previous attempt to draw textures. I'm going to fill this with a color that hopefully looks like a dull, cool gray. And then, specifically for Paint.net, there is a option for blend mode. So I'm going to choose multiply, and maybe that's a little too dark for the gap between the bricks. Oh, by the way, I need to copy this end so I can. No, I need to copy this end here. So we have the one end of a brick here, and okay, so perfect. That is the right measurement. So I'll copy this end and paste it over here. Now we have something that's starting to look like a proper brick texture. But maybe the grout is a little too dark. In that case, I'm gonna wanna adjust it so the brightness is a bit higher. There we go. But now I want a little bit of a shine to it. So what I'll do is I'll add a brand new layer, move it up here, save this working file, and I'll go in and no, I want to reduce the opacity on this. So there we go. Now there's a little bit of brightness to it. So similarly, I'm going to make it. Yeah, similarly, I'm going to make some edges a little darker. So let's just work on this layer now. No, not dark enough. There we go. Pretty simplistic, and if we want to go back in and spice it up even more, we can. So kind of looks a little metallic, don't you think? A little too metallic. So in that case, I'm gonna go back to this layer and I'm gonna adjust the curves on this. So Actually, no. Yeah, it's a bit involved, and sometimes it is just looking at this and wondering what are you even doing, but by desaturating the texture a little bit, it starts to look a lot more like bricks. And again, we want something that maybe instead of a cool gray, maybe you can go with a warm gray. So I'm changing the hue to be a bit towards the warm side. It's a little bit hard to tell because sometimes a little bit hard to tell, but I want something a little bit on the warm side. So if I take it up to the extreme and pick out a hue that's a little bit orange, and then turn on the saturation by a lot, so now it looks like that. Okay, so maybe we've changed our mind and want the brick textures to be, well, I'm editing on the wrong layer, so I'm just gonna re-edit these textures a bit more. No, that didn't work. Never mind. But let's look at these layers and check this out. Maybe we want to make these corners a little darker. And hope that works. Okay, so these are big bricks. We can use these. Let's use them on the floor. Why not? So for us to use this image, I'm going to save this .pdn file, and now I'm going to save it as a .png file. This is going to go straight to the desktop, so it's going to take a little bit of searching to find it, but I'm going to save it here, save the file, but it's going to ask me to flatten it. That's okay, because the flattening does not occur on the .pdn file. It applies it for when we export the .png file. And now, somewhere on my desktop, we have a brick texture. Here it is. So, let's bring back this window here and create a brand new folder for our textures. So I'm gonna drag and drop this big bricks textures into this folder here. And now we have a brick texture. Now I cannot just apply it to the walls just yet. Well, I can, but it will automatically create a material for us when we try. So here is the material that was made by default. It's also true here that if we want to change the look of our textures, we can. So really the process is to create a new material that uses one of your textures. When you do, you want to assign your texture into the albedo field up here. So let's reset this entire texture. Reset. So now we have a blank material. It is now in the inspector. I can now drag and drop the big bricks texture into this albedo field, and now look at that. We have our big bricks texture as a material. So now I can just take this material and place that on the ground. Doesn't look good, doesn't it? Well, yeah, we have a problem. It's now applying the huge texture for the whole entirety of the floor. And that's not what we want. Okay, so to get our texture to tile, don't use the tiling fields under the secondary maps. You want it under the main maps. So check this out. I'm changing the tiling, and let's do a very high tiling, so it's say 60, and then 60, 60. And look at that. We have a brick texture on the ground. How neat is that? We can now proceed with the step of applying textures on all our other walls. So let's make a new texture, okay? Let's go back to paint.net. Okay, so I've already saved the big bricks from before. I'm going to save a brand new .pdn file. Okay, so this is the .png that was exported. I want to reopen the .pdn working file, so that way I can go in and save it as a brand new file. Let's call it small bricks. So now we have a big bricks and a small bricks. The big bricks is for the floor, the small bricks is for all the other walls. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to have a wackier texture for this. I want to have wackier bricks for this one. So what I'm just going to do is I'm going to disable these 2 layers, and then I'm just going to start moving these things around. So move it like that. So it looks a little bit uneven. So let's get wacky with this. So, oh yeah, let's copy that over there, and then I'll copy this, move it down here. I do want it to, that's a little too big. Let's do that. And now we have a wackier but smaller brick texture. We just need to repair these bits on it. So I'll copy that, paste it here for the little shading on the bricks. Let's see if that works. No, let's copy this one over here. No, not like that. Let's do this. What I can finally do now is, if I leave it like this is going to be one long continuous brick, which kind of doesn't make sense. So I'll just copy this part here, move it down one, fix this bit up here, and now I can edit this here, and there we go. So those changes don't line up with layer 3, and those were the little highlights that I made previously, so I'm gonna have to go fix that. So give me a minute. I realize now in the middle of editing this that I found a part of the brick texture that would not tile properly, so I do need to adjust this right now. So I'll go edit the bottom layer here. Yeah, it is it is a bit tricky to learn how to make textures like this, but with a little trial and error, we can get something a little passable. If we don't like it, we can go back and change the textures and re-import it into the scene. Because it's a texture, well, we can do that. If we don't like the texture that we like, we can just swap it out and we can just change it up and place it back and place the new one in the scene. So let's see what this looks like now. No, it's still a little off, but it is progress at least. So let me just take this and paste that into here. Actually, no, I have to paste this into down here so we have a little sheen on the bricks. So what I really did was copy the sheen that was on the larger bricks, but not the shading, because now that I look at this, it's probably not necessary to also copy the shading. So this is the original layer. I duplicated it so I would have a brand new layer to work with. But now that our texture looks good, what we could do is give it a different color. So I'm going to give it a cool gray color. Like that. Hopefully that's good. Let's try that, save, and export this image as a .png. So smallbricks.png. Okay, this is just for the sake of demonstration. Once again, if you want to, you can just find textures from online, but I am going the extra mile of, well, producing my own textures. So let's just slap this on a wall here and see whether that looks good. So the tricky thing about tiling it on a wall is the walls are all different sizes. So ideally, we would want our walls to be sectioned off into pieces that we just place in sections all across all across the scene. Because our walls are made out of stretched blocks, there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution to any of these walls. So I'm just going to do my best and change the tiling on these for this material and hope that it looks passable. And yeah, there we go. Hopefully that's passable, and we'll just place our brand new material on the walls. If it doesn't look good, we can probably make a new material and give it a different tiling value. Maybe it's a little too gray, but that's fine. We can just change it in the editor here. So maybe I want something that's closer to that looks good, right? I don't like the fact that some of the longer walls have stretched bricks, so I'll just make a copy of this material and call it small bricks wide. So this is going to have a different stretch value. So I'm going to place it on one of my wide walls here, and I'll change the tiling so that that way it looks like there are more bricks on the wall. And I'm going to apply it to only the long walls. Once again, ideally you probably should be using sections of walls as a primitive and build our walls that way instead. There we go. So now we have bricks on our walls. How neat is that? The next thing we could consider is making a skybox, applying a skybox to our scene. So this one's a bit more involved, and yeah, I'm just gonna cheat here and find a skybox texture from online. So I'll be right back. Okay, so I had to go around and go to opengameart.org to find a few skybox textures that we can use. I had already downloaded these skybox textures already, and I have them in a folder. So when you open this up, and when you open up this skybox, you'll notice it's broken up into 6 pieces. So these go on, if you imagine the camera as being inside of a cube, these 6 textures go on one of the 6 faces in the cube. Much like this. So what we can do is create a skybox and use those 6 images to create our skybox. For that, we'll need to create a brand new material that is whose shader is not standard but rather skybox. So let's do that real quick in Unity. So let's reopen our project and create a brand new skybox material. So this is a material, but instead of the standard shader, it is a skybox. We want the 6-sided skybox so we can place down one of the 6 textures individually. So let's go to our textures folder and import those skybox textures. So I'll create a new folder, call it skybox, and I had already selected out a skybox that we could use. I'll just drag and drop them into here. There we go. Go back to the materials, select my new material, skybox. Let's call it skybox. With this open in the inspector, I'm going to go back to the skybox folder and place them into these 6 slots here, taking note of how it appears down here. So this is where the skybox appears. Let's make this really large so we have a good view of what's going on. So now So this is the top. So this texture here, pause Y, that is the top of the skybox. I'll place it up here. Pause Y. So negative Y is down here. So now we have the bottom of the skybox. Not shown yet, but we're getting there. Negative X, so that is the negative X direction. Positive X is the positive X direction. There we go. Negative Z. No, that was positive Z, so let's double check that. And negative Z. Oh, I mixed it up. Okay, so that should be positive Z, and there we go. Okay, so there is one more texture that is not quite right here. I'm gonna double check this. So once we have that in place, now we have a proper skybox. Look at that. So now we have two. So now the next trick is to have this be used in the scene. So go to Window, Rendering, Lighting, or just press Ctrl 9. A little window will pop up here, or it might pop up somewhere else. It's not attached to anything, but I'll just put it up here for now. Click Environment, and you'll see a skybox material up here. Replace that with the skybox material that we just made. There we go. So the lighting of the scene is also influenced by the skybox that we use, so that's why everything looks yellow. So this might not be the best kind of skybox what we're going for, but let's just use it for demonstration purposes. What we could do is replace this with something else entirely. Alright, so our next step is to import a 3D model into the scene. So I'll be providing the 3D models for you as well as the textures. So first, for this to work, let's do this. As I said, I'll be providing these files for you to use, for you to play around with. But let's import a 3D model into the scene and see how we can have it be used as both the player and the enemy. So you can just import the .blend file into your project as is. Alternatively, what we can do is export the blend file as a .fbx file. For us to do that, you'll need to open the .blend file in Blender, go to export, and export it as a .fbx file. So I already have it exported as a .fbx file already, but if you want to export this as a .fbx, you'll have to go through the steps, export fbx, there we go. We don't have to save the file anymore because we already have a .fbx file already. Then we can just drag and drop the fbx file into our project like that. Next, we want textures for our car. So you can pick out whatever textures you want. I'll just pick out red and blue, drag and drop those. Now I need to place 2 instances of the model into the scene. Once it's imported, we can simply drag and drop it. They are automatically scaled and rotated, so you don't want to mess with these rotation and scale values here. For now, let's do this. I'm going to reset the position of our car so that it's at the origin. On the player, I want to make sure the player is also at the origin. So, with that in mind, we realize that our car is rotated the wrong way around. So I'll rotate it about the y-axis like this. There we go. And really make sure it's 180 degrees. Next, what I'll do is I'll make this car a child of the player. So now we have this. The car and our capsule for the player are both combined as one game object. Okay, let's go back and apply that texture to our car. So I'm gonna use the blue one here, and once again, if I drag and drop the vehicle texture like that, it will Unity will automatically create a material which is then applied to our vehicle here. So actually I made these materials in an earlier step, so what we can just do is once again drag and drop the material, and there we go. So now we have a blue car for the player and a red car for the enemy. But now we have this capsule that's sticking out. So quick and dirty fix for that is to turn off the mesh renderer for the capsule. So it's still going to be a capsule for the player, but that's fine. We have the text, we have the character controller still attached to the player. So let's look in the game view and realize that it's a little bit off, because it turns out the camera is a little bit too far back now. So an easy fix is to just translate it a little bit, so now we're just staring at the hood of our car. Vroom vroom. Let's try it out now and see what happens next. So I can get in front of the enemy and he'll still shoot me as before, as will this turret. I can shoot down the enemy from before, still works. And there are some more enemies over here. Let's see if I can get them to fire at me. Yeah, they can, still. I can also still shoot them down as before. Okay, nice. Alright, so now we have crudely made the player into a car. Let's make the enemy into a car. So I'm gonna have to... I need to copy this red car here and go to the editor for the enemy here. I'm gonna paste the car here, and I actually need to scale down the car. Actually, no, I need to scale down the enemy. So because the enemy is stretched up like that, I need to restore the scale, not 0, 1. So that way it's a flatter cube. What I want to do next is I need to 0 the position on this so that the car is roughly where the enemy is. Let's lower it a little and see whether the car is rotated properly. If not, we'll have to rotate it again. So let's go back to the game and go to the scene with all our cars moving backwards. That's not right. Let's fix it up. So let's edit our... This is the smart enemy, by the way. We can do this to the enemy that we made back in chapters 2 and 3. Same process, but let's fix it up the car here so it's rotated 180 degrees about the y-axis. Save that. And now, because it's a prefab, any changes we make to the prefab affect all instances of the prefab in the scene. So since I have a bunch of copies all the way in this room here, if I play the game now, and go in the scene view, look at that. This is a little hilarious, don't you think? We have those cars just moving around the scene. The collisions don't quite work as well because it's for... The collision detection was originally for the cube, but we're forcing it to work with the car instead. Ideally, what we should do is, once again, instead we should be using the enemy should reattach all of our game components from the original capsule and cube onto the cars. But since we wanted this to be a quick and dirty process, we did it as such, and so we have this. We probably need to scale everything to be an appropriate size though, because the hoods of each car is clipping into the walls a little. So yeah, that is something we may need to consider as well. But again, we can do that in our editing steps. So check that out. We have Doom, except with cars. Vroom. And their death animations are still the same. So just like that, we can have them spin like this. Again, a quick and dirty way of getting our game working. So now let's consider our last thing on our to-do list, and that is to create a particle system. Okay, so the last thing we want to do for our scene is to add in a particle system. So to add a particle system, I already have one here, but let's delete that and go to Game Object, Effects, Particle System. When you open this in the inspector, you'll have a ton of options. Let's go with the first one, and that is size over lifetime. Oh, by the way, if we just select the particle system in the Unity scene view here, you'll see the particles emitting and moving as they will appear in the game. So I'm gonna move this back to the origin by zeroing out the X, Y, and Z position values, and now we have a good view of all the particles emitting from the thing. So this thing here is a particle emitter. It's emitting particles, and they are moving in a particular way as defined by these settings here. Let's pick out size over lifetime. So I'm gonna click that, and you see this little line here? That's actually a Bezier curve that we can edit. So right now what it says is from time 0 to time from, okay, so over the life of this particle, it's gonna grow from 0 to full size. What we can do is edit this curve. So instead of that, we can adjust the handles on these nodes here. So that way, we have something that looks like, we could have something that looks like this. And I'll put a note up here for ease of control. So what this says now is grow to full size really quickly and then quickly shrink down. See? Grows to full size really quickly and then slowly shrinks back to 0. Nice. Another thing we can adjust is the color of the particle. So this is fire, so we would want something red, like that. Let's just put it back to white for now. Another option we can change is rotation overlapping. So since the default particle is something circular, this isn't really going to have an effect, but let's just select the rotation over lifetime option here, and let's just set the angular velocity. So this is going to rotate it at that rate there. So notice how they're spinning now. It wouldn't look like they're spinning because, again, these are all circular particles, but with this curved bounding box. So what you see rotating is the bounding box for the particle. So we can play around with these settings. So for example, how long the particle lasts. So if I type in 3, then they're just gonna last for 3 seconds and then disappear. Another thing we can change is the shape. So let's reselect our particle system here and shrink down this curve here. So the shape, that is the blue border over here. So right now they're emitting up in a cone. I can adjust the angle of the cone, which affects how spread out they become. If I narrow the cone a lot, now it's a column of particles going up. I can also adjust the radius of the cone to make it a lot narrower. So there we go. So now I have a narrow cone of particles going up. Or I can make it as wide as I want. Let's make it narrow. Yeah, there we go. It's a cone of particles going all the way up. We can change it to be whatever we want as well. So there's a hemisphere option. Let's go with the cone. The cone's a good option. So let's go back to the cone. There we go. So our last thing we're gonna do, is we're gonna make a fire particle texture in paint.net once again. So I'm gonna save it here, and I'm gonna go back to paint.net. We've been making a brick texture already, so let's make a brand new texture. So let's make a brand new texture. So new texture, 16 by 16, and let's make a simple fire texture. So what I'll just do is I'll pick out a transparent red color and color it like that. Then I'll fill the inside. I need to shrink down the tolerance so it doesn't bleed everywhere. But there we go, it just bled again. So I want to turn off anti-aliasing, so it's perfectly like that. Next one I want to do is color the inside orange. So I'm giving this some orange highlights, and I'm doing this with the semi-transparent colors here. So as I build them up, they're layering up. So that may or may not be a good thing, but there we go. Let's then go in with the yellow here and color this in. And we'll overlay the yellow. There we go. So now we have a decent looking fire particle. This was just made on a whim, so you might want to, much like with the brick textures, make a working file that has your in progress texture. But yeah, there we go. A decent looking fire particle. Let's save that as fireparticle.png. Save. There we go. So now it's on my desktop, and that's a fire particle. And we're gonna take this particle and import it into Unity. So much like everything else we've done so far, we can. Oh, this is a different project, by the way. Let's go back to our first-person shooter and import our fire particle. So I'll just drag and drop it into here. And now when I select the particle system, I have the option to change the sprite here to be my fire particle. So before we do that, we need to change a few settings about this texture in the inspector. So alpha is transparency. Select that to true, and then save the changes you've made to that. So there's a little apply button. Click that, applied. So as with the skybox, we need to change. Okay, so as with the skybox, the shader must be changed as well. So so once again, we need to make a material. So I'm gonna make a new material, fire particle, and change it to to particles standard unlit. So particles standard unlit. Okay. In this little albedo field here, we need to drag and drop our fire particle texture like that. Okay, now we have a fire texture. Now let's select the particle system once again, and under renderer, so this might take some time to find, but it is renderer all the way down here. The material, there's a material field. We can use that for our fire particle. Okay, so so there's actually one more setting on our fire particle we have to change, and that is transparent. Actually, no, that should be set to additive, so that way the transparency on our particle works. So yeah. So if you select our particle system once again, now we have fire particles emitting from our car here. So we can use that, and I guess one thing we can do is attach it to the enemy. So I'm gonna copy this particle system and go back to our smart enemy over here, paste it over here, and position it so that it's at the same position as the enemy. So I'll move it a little bit forward so it looks like the particles are emitting from the hood. But I'm going to make one change to the wandering AI. So I'm gonna go back to one of my scripts, and that is the wandering AI script. Oh, my bad. It was supposed to be the reactive target script. So let's open the reactive target script, and I'm gonna add a field for the particle system. What we want to do is have the particles activate when the reactive target is hit. So what I'm gonna do is I'll create a private field, serialize field, private particle system, particles, and I'll put an underscore to indicate that this is supposed to be a private field. In the start method, I'm gonna say particles dot enable emission equals false. So in this particular version of Unity, this is a deprecated field, and it's advising me to use emission.enabled instead. I'm gonna leave it as this for now, and in the death animation coroutine, I'm gonna turn on the particles. So there we go. Particles.enable emission true equals true. So I'm gonna turn off this particle system here by clicking that checkbox there. So the hope is when I play the game and I move around to find the enemy. Okay, so there's actually one problem. I forgot to assign a few things in the inspector. So the fact that they're spewing out particles is a dead giveaway to where they are. So let's fix that up. Smart enemy. There is now a field for the particle system. I need to drag and drop this particle system into here. So now when this script begins, it should hopefully turn off the particles. Yeah. So now if we move around and try to find the enemy now, and shoot it. Look at that. Once I shoot them, they start to emit particles. How funny is this? Just fun, emitting particles like upwards from the engine, like it's just. Alright, so hopefully this was a more fun endeavor on what to do to spice up your game. We went through the basics of white. We went through the concept of white boxing. We applied a few textures to our scene. We imported a model into Unity, we added a skybox, and we also added a particle system and made a custom particle. So hopefully this was a little bit of fun, and I am gonna have a lot of editing to do. So this may take a while to upload to Canvas, but in the meantime, hopefully this gives us a few ideas on what we want to do for our games. Okay, two more things I want to address with the video, now that I have had some time to watch it and edit it. There were a few things that I missed. One, with the skybox texture. Let's go back to that material for the skybox. So, material, skybox. If I open the little preview down here, depending on your import settings, you might see white borders on the edges of the skybox. It's a little bit subtle, but they are visible here, and they might not be white depending on the skybox textures. So what's going on here is there is a clamp setting that isn't set right. So at the very edge, you can see through the skybox, and that breaks the illusion of immersion. So to get rid of these little thin borders, and they are there. They're just really subtle, and the video quality might not be able to pick it up properly. But to fix that issue, select all 6 skybox textures. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm holding Control and clicking each one individually. Set the wrap mode. The clamp. There we go. Once you set that, apply. Now if you go back to the material, you'll see that those edges are gone. So that is one setting that we need to check off regarding the skybox. That's number 1. Number 2, the other missing thing is in regards to the particle system. To demonstrate what's going on, I'm going to go back to the reactive target and comment out this line that turns off the emission of particles. So what I want to demonstrate was something subtle that you may have seen in the video earlier, and that is the particles are going up, but they're actually moving with the enemies. So instead of moving with the enemies, what they really should be doing... Yeah, you see how the enemies are dragging along the particles with them? They're going up, but they're going up and sideways with the vehicle. So what we want to do is check off one more setting in the particle system. So I'm just going to edit the prefab directly, so I'm going to click this little button here, select the particle system, and that setting is, it's a little hard to see, but it's a little always halfway through this list of settings here and before these checkboxes. Simulation space local, set that to world. So what this does is, when particles are emitted from their source, they're just gonna float up on their own. Or at least in this case, we have particles floating up, and when the source moves, those particles are just gonna float up on their own. They're not gonna be moved with the emitter. So, those are the changes we've made to the particle emitter. If I play the game again with that one changed setting, notice how the path of the particles are slanted. Well, that's because the particles are going up while the source, the emitter, is moving sideways. Previously, they were moving up along with the particle emitter that was moving. And now that we have these particles moving in the world space, now they're just moving up and only up. Right. That's just something you want That's something to keep in mind if, for example, you want particles coming out of, say, an exhaust pipe. So imagine if you had an exhaust pipe on these vehicles, we would want the particles to go up, but also, when the vehicle moves, you want the path the particles take to look like it's slanted, basically. So that's what is going on here. We want these particles to move at a slanted path relative to the vehicle moving. So that is one other setting you would want to consider in regards to the particle system. Alright, that's all the extra tips regarding the particle system and the skybox. I'll leave it to you. The next assignment's gonna be you probably toying with the scene and just having fun with a few of these things. So I might ask you to make a texture or import a texture, and then play around with the particle system. Okay, all right. Okay, that's gonna be it.